Jessica's face turned ashen as the judge's words echoed through the courtroom. The property at 1428 Maple Avenue is legally owned by... The pause stretched like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Emily Louise Clark. My sister's champagne. Glass froze halfway to her lips, water condensation dripping onto her designer dress. The same sister who, 3 months earlier, had hissed through clenched teeth at her own wedding reception. Moved to the back table with the distant relatives. "You're ruining our photos in that off-the-rack dress." In that moment, as recognition dawned in her eyes, I realized that sometimes the quietest person in the room holds the most power, and I was just getting started. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Oakridge, I learned early on to make myself small. Not physically, though at 5'4" to Jessica's willowy 5'9", that comparison was inevitable too. But in presence, in expectations, in the space I permitted myself to occupy in our family's narrative. Our modest 2-story colonial house on Elm Street housed 4 people but revolved around only 3. Dad, a high school football coach turned vice principal. Mom, a former beauty queen who still wore her pageant smile when greeting neighbors. And Jessica, their golden firstborn, who inherited Mom's classic beauty and Dad's competitive spirit. Then there was me, Emily, the afterthought, born 4 years later when they'd already taken all the first photos and filled the baby book with meticulous records. By the time I took my first steps, the camera had been put away. My milestones were noted with quiet nods rather than celebration. "Emily's walking now," Mom would remark to visitors, as if reporting on a somewhat interesting weather pattern, before pivoting back to Jessica's latest triumph on the debate team or cheer squad. Our childhood bedroom told the story better than I ever could. A perfect rectangle divided unequally, Jessica's side sprawling with trophies, ribbons, and framed certificates of achievement cascading from her bulletin board, posters of boy bands, and later, college pennants covering the wall. My side housed a modest bookshelf, a desk I'd refinished myself from a yard sale find, and walls left mostly bare because whenever I put something up, Mom would comment that it cluttered the visual space. The invisible boundary between our territories felt like the border between 2 countries, one prosperous and expansive, the other practical and contained. "Jessie has a natural sparkle," I overheard Mom telling her bridge club when I was 11, during a moment when they thought I was engrossed in homework at the kitchen table. "Emily's more steady, good with numbers. She'll make someone a reliable wife someday." The words settled into my bones with a dull recognition. Not special, not exceptional, but reliable, like a well-functioning appliance. The girl you call when you need help with math homework or a last-minute babysitter, not the one you spotlight or celebrate. Jessica didn't mean to be cruel most of the time. That was the complicated truth I wrestled with throughout our shared childhood. She simply accepted the adoration and preference as her natural due, something she'd earned by being louder, prettier, more socially adept. On good days, she treated me with distracted affection. On bad days, with irritated dismissal. When friends came over, I was useful for making snacks or giving up the TV room, but never quite welcome in the circle of giggles and gossip. "Emily," she'd say with that particular tone, half sigh and half command, "could you maybe not mention that calculus test at dinner? Dad's stressed about the game Friday, and you know how he gets when you talk about nerdy stuff." Or, "Emily, seriously, that sweater with those pants. If you want, I can pick out your outfit for Thanksgiving." Each correction delivered with the conviction that she was doing me a favor, helping mold her socially awkward sister into something more presentable. Grandma Ruth was my refuge, my mother's mother. She moved in with us after Grandpa died when I was 10. Unlike my parents, whose attention always seemed to slide past me to Jessica, Grandma Ruth saw me with clear eyes and unwavering focus. She had been an accountant in an era when women were expected to type letters, not manage finances. Her small bedroom off the kitchen became my sanctuary, scented with lavender sachets and filled with books on subjects my parents found impractical: philosophy, architecture, financial management. "Numbers don't lie," she would tell me, blue, eyes sharp behind reading glasses as we sat at her small desk reviewing investment reports. "People see what they expect to see, but numbers show you what's actually there." She taught me to balance a checkbook before I had one, explained compound interest while we baked cookies, and instilled in me the radical notion that a woman's security should come from her own resources, not a husband's provision. "Your mother means well," she would say when I came to her room, quiet tears burning after another dinner where my report card was glossed over while Jessica's B+ in English warranted a celebratory ice cream trip. "But she doesn't understand that different flowers bloom in different seasons." She would pat my hand, her skin tissue paper thin over blue veins. "You're a late autumn bloom, Emily. Your colors will show when the showy summer blossoms have already faded." When Jessica was crowned homecoming queen her senior year, the living room transformed into a shrine to her achievement. The tiara, displayed on the mantel, professionally taken photos in glossy frames arranged on the piano, local newspaper clipping framed beside them. That same week, I placed second in a statewide mathematics competition, earning a modest scholarship fund. For future college use, Mom taped the certificate to the refrigerator, where it remained for 3 days before being replaced by the menu for Jessica's homecoming dinner. Dad patted my shoulder awkwardly when I showed him the scholarship letter. "Good job, kiddo," he said, already turning back to the game on TV. "Always knew you had a good head on your shoulders." The praise felt formulaic, expected, a participation trophy of parental acknowledgement. I didn't begrudge Jessica her moment of glory. What stung was the disparity, the way my achievements existed in a different category altogether, measured on a scale that somehow always rendered them less significant. Jessica was exceptional. I was adequate. Jessica deserved celebration. I deserved a nod of approval. These were the family bylaws, unwritten but rigorously enforced. By high school, I had internalized the expected hierarchy. I joined the yearbook, committee, and the math team. Activities that kept me busy after school, but didn't compete with Jessica's lingering legacy as social royalty. I made a few close friends who, like me, existed in the margins of teenage social structure. Not outcasts, just overlooked. We studied together, shared quiet jokes, and never vied for spotlight that we knew was directed elsewhere. Where Jessica applied to prestigious universities with my parents hovering anxiously over each application, I researched scholarships and financial aid packages alone at the kitchen table late at night. I knew college would be expensive, and while my parents had established a fund for Jessica years ago, mine was considerably smaller, an afterthought established when Grandma Ruth pointedly asked about it at a family dinner. "We've got something set aside for Emily, too," Dad had said quickly, eyes darting to Mom. Though with her grades, we're hoping for scholarships. The subject was changed before details like dollar amounts could be discussed, but I understood the message. I would need to fund my own future. That night, Grandma Ruth slipped me a book on scholarship applications and a folder of information about in-state tuition rates. Jessica left for State University with a car packed full of new bedding, electronics, and clothes. My parents drove her to campus, staying 2 days to help her settle in and meet her roommate's family. When my time came 2 years later, I took the bus to the local community college, having calculated that completing my general education requirements there before transferring would save thousands in tuition. Mom offered to help me shop for supplies, but a work emergency at Dad's school meant they simply gave me their credit card with a spending limit for essentials. "Just get what you need," Mom said, distracted by a phone call from Jessica about a sorority rush issue. Nothing fancy. I bought one new outfit for first day impressions, secondhand textbooks, and a laptop from the previous year's model that was on clearance. The remaining credit limit I returned unused, earning a nod of approval for my thriftiness. Community college suited me. Without Jessica's shadow to navigate, I discovered my own academic strengths. Professors learned my name, praised my work. Ethic encouraged me to apply for specialized programs. I joined the business club and found myself elected treasurer, then president the following year. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I secured an internship at Oakridge Community Bank that evolved into a part-time position in their accounts department. When Grandma Ruth's health began declining during my second year of college, I rearranged my schedule to help care for her. Mom and Dad were busy. Dad with his administrative duties that stretched into evenings, Mom with her community board positions, and supporting Jessica through a dramatic breakup that warranted multiple weekend visits to campus. So it was mostly me sitting beside Grandma's bed, reading investment newsletters aloud, or simply holding her increasingly frail hand. "You're stronger than you know," she told me one evening, her voice weak but her gaze penetrating as always. "Don't let them convince you that being overlooked means being less valuable. The best investments are often the ones everyone else ignores." She passed away quietly in her sleep the week before my associate's degree graduation ceremony. The funeral was held the same day as the ceremony, so I never walked across the stage. Jessica flew home, tear-stained and dramatic in her grief, though she had visited Grandma Ruth only twice in the previous year. I sat dry-eyed through the service, a strange numbness encasing me like amber. The lawyer called a week later. Grandma Ruth had left her modest savings, about $40,000, to me in a dedicated account. The accompanying letter explained that she had managed her late husband's pension carefully over the years, living frugally to preserve this nest egg. "For Emily," the letter stated simply, "who understands the value of patience and compound growth." My parents were surprised but not particularly interested in the details. "That's nice," Mom said when I mentioned the inheritance. "It'll help with finishing your bachelor's degree." She immediately returned to discussing Jessica's summer internship at a marketing firm, secured through Dad's college roommate's connection. I didn't correct her assumption. I had already been accepted to the state business school with a partial scholarship, and my bank job had promised to accommodate my class schedule and contribute to tuition reimbursement. The inheritance would remain untouched, invested according to the principles Grandma Ruth had taught me, conservative but strategic, focused on long-term growth rather than quick returns. By the time Jessica met Mark Preston during her final year of graduate school, I had completed my bachelor's in finance with a minor in real estate development and secured a full-time position at Oakridge Community Bank. I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment downtown, drove a used but reliable Honda, and had begun to build my own quiet life. Our family dinners, now less frequent with both daughters technically out of the nest, followed the established pattern. Jessica's career aspirations and relationship milestones commanding center stage, while my steady progress at the bank warranted brief, perfunctory inquiries. Mark came from money, old money, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, because the quality of the cashmere and the casual mentions of family properties in multiple states said everything necessary. He was handsome in that bland, privileged way that suggested generations of careful breeding and expensive dentistry, with a law degree from an Ivy League university and a position at his father's firm awaiting him after the bar exam. Jessica was radiant in his presence, elevated by his attention and the future it promised. The engagement was announced at Christmas, the princess-cut diamond requiring its own spotlight in our family narrative. Dad pulled out the expensive scotch he'd been saving. Mom immediately started creating wedding planning binders, and the next 6 months revolved entirely around venues, flowers, guest lists, and Jessica's quest for the perfect dress. "Emily, you'll help with the invitations, right?" Mom asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Your handwriting is so neat." and Jessica's just swamped with dress fittings and venue tours. I agreed, as I always did, adding envelope addressing sessions to my evenings after work. Jessica and Mom selected the invitation design, cream cardstock with gold foil detailing, formal language announcing Dr. and Mrs. Richard Clark requested, the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Jessica Ann to Mark William Preston Jr. The envelopes required special calligraphy pens that I purchased myself when Mom forgot to include them in the wedding supply orders. The engagement party was held at the Preston Family Country Club, a sprawling complex with perfectly manicured grounds and a ballroom overlooking the championship golf course. I wore a navy dress I'd found on clearance at a department store. Simple but elegant, or so I thought until Jessica cornered me by the ladies' room. "Couldn't you have found something a little more special?" she whispered, eyeing my outfit with thinly veiled disappointment. "The Prestons are really particular about appearances, and honestly, you look like you're dressed for a job interview." She was resplendent in a blush-colored designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair and makeup professionally done for the occasion. "I thought it was appropriate," I replied, smoothing the fabric self-consciously. "It's fine," she sighed, the dismissal clear in her tone. "Just maybe stand toward the back for the group photos? We're trying to coordinate a specific color palette." She squeezed my arm in what might have been intended as sisterly affection before gliding back to Mark's side, instantly transforming back into the radiant bride-to-be. I spent most of the evening helping elderly relatives find their seats and ensuring the gift table remained organized, tasks that kept me busy and mostly invisible. When it came time for family photos, Jessica's suggested positioning became unnecessary. The photographer simply directed immediate family to the front, and I was naturally relegated to the outer edges without anyone having to request it specifically. As the wedding date approached, my role expanded to include assembling welcome bags for out-of-town guests, picking up last-minute supplies, and fielding calls from distant relatives about accommodations. Jessica tasted cakes and chose linens. I created spreadsheets tracking RSVPs and dietary restrictions. Mom coordinated with the florist and venue. I addressed thank you cards for shower gifts in advance so Jessica would only need to write brief personal notes. "You're such a help," Mom told me one evening as I sorted escort cards alphabetically. "I don't know what we'd do without your organizational skills." The pause made it clear she had searched for a diplomatic way to acknowledge my contribution, without suggesting anything particularly special about it. I was useful, as always, the reliable background player in Jessica's starring production. The Preston family hosted the rehearsal dinner at Bellamy's, the most expensive restaurant in Oakridge, where reservations were typically booked months in advance and the menu didn't list prices. I sat between a Preston great-uncle who was hard of hearing and Mark's teenage cousin who spent the entire evening texting under the table. From across the room, I watched my parents charm Mark's family, fitting seamlessly into this world of privilege as if they'd been born to it, rather than accessing it through their daughter's fortunate match. After dinner, Mr. Preston Sr. stood to give a toast, crystal glass raised toward the ceiling's chandelier. "To Mark and Jessica," he intoned with practiced gravitas, "the perfect union of two exceptional young people. The Prestons are delighted to welcome Jessica into our family, and we look forward to the brilliant future these two will build together." Applause rippled through the room. I clapped automatically, watching Jessica glow under the collective approval. "And of course," Mr. Preston continued, his gaze sweeping the room before settling briefly, curiously, on me, "we're pleased to meet Jessica's family as well." The addition felt like an afterthought, a polite acknowledgement of the supporting cast in this romantic epic. My parents beamed. I sipped my water and calculated how many hours remained before I could reasonably excuse myself. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather recognized the importance of accommodating Jessica's vision. The ceremony would be held at Oakridge Historic Chapel, followed by a reception at the Rosewood Country Club, venues. secured through Mark's family connections, though my parents were contributing significantly to the costs, a financial stretch they deemed necessary to maintain appearances. While Jessica and her bridesmaids, former sorority sisters and cousins from Mom's side of the family, prepared in the designated bridal suite with a professional styling team, I helped the wedding coordinator arrange welcome signage and ensure the programs were placed correctly on each seat. My hair and makeup I'd done myself, allocating extra time that morning to achieve something special yet appropriate for the sister of the bride who wasn't quite important enough to be included in the bridal party. "Emily, there you are," Mom called, catching me as I adjusted the flower arrangement near the guest book. "Jessica forgot her something borrowed. Can you run to the house and get her grandmother's handkerchief from my jewelry box? The blue one with the lace edge." She was already turning away, phone buzzing with another wedding emergency. "And hurry, please. Photos start in an hour." I made the 20-minute drive each way, navigating Saturday traffic with growing anxiety about returning in time. When I finally reached the bridal suite, slightly breathless, Jessica was surrounded by her attendants, a vision in ivory lace and tulle. She took the handkerchief without quite looking at me. "Thanks," she said absently, handing it to her maid of honor to tuck into her bouquet. "You should get to your seat. We're starting soon, and Mom said to tell you your hair looks fine, but maybe pin back that side part a bit more for the family photos later." She turned back to the mirror, accepting a lipstick touch-up from the makeup artist, my presence already forgotten. The ceremony was objectively beautiful. String quartet playing softly as guests arrived, flower arrangements in cream and blush cascading from antique urns, Jessica floating down the aisle on Dad's arm as if she'd been rehearsing this moment since birth. I watched from my seat in the second row, technically family but somehow adjacent to it, close enough to witness but not quite centered in the frame. At the reception, I was initially seated at the family table near the front of the ballroom, beside my parents and across from Mark's younger brother and his girlfriend. The centerpieces were stunning, lush arrangements of roses, peonies, and delicate greenery in crystal vases that caught the light from overhead chandeliers. The place settings featured gold-rimmed china, multiple crystal glasses for various beverage options, and embossed menu cards listing the four-course meal to come. I had just unfolded my napkin when Jessica appeared beside me, her smile tight at the edges despite the photographer capturing candid reception moments nearby. She leaned down, her diamond earrings catching the light as she whispered close to my ear. "Emily, there's been a slight change to the seating arrangement," she said, voice honey-sweet but with an unmistakable firmness beneath. "We need this seat for Mark's godmother. She unexpectedly brought her husband, and they really should be at the family table." She straightened, gesturing vaguely toward the back of the room. "There's a place for you at table 16 with some of the distant relatives. The coordinator will show you." I glanced at my parents, seated just 2 chairs away, already engaged in animated conversation with Mark's parents. Neither looked in my direction or showed any awareness of this developing situation. The choice was clear: make a scene at my sister's wedding or quietly accommodate the request. I stood, gathering my clutch purse and the wrap that matched my carefully selected dusty blue dress. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Congratulations again. The ceremony was lovely." Jessica's smile relaxed fractionally. Mission accomplished. "Thanks for understanding. You know how particular Mark's family is about these things." She squeezed my arm briefly before turning away, instantly reabsorbed into her perfect day. Table 16 was indeed at the far back of the reception hall, near the service entrance where waitstaff bustled in and out of the kitchen. My table mates included 2 elderly great-aunts who confused me with a cousin from the other side of the family, a teenage second cousin absorbed in his phone, and 3 empty seats for guests who had apparently decided not to attend. The centerpiece was noticeably smaller than those at the front tables, the chair covers slightly less crisp, the overall placement an afterthought in the reception design. From this vantage point, I watched the celebration unfold like a movie playing in the distance. The grand entrance of the bridal party, the first dance, the toasts offered by the best man and maid of honor extolling Jessica and Mark's perfect partnership. When dinner was served, our table received each course noticeably later than the front tables, the food slightly cooler, the presentations less pristine. The teenage cousin abandoned the table entirely after the main course, leaving me alone with the great aunts who had given up on conversation and were simply eating in companionable silence. As the dancing began in earnest, I observed my family from afar. Mom and Dad moving somewhat awkwardly but enthusiastically to the live band's rendition of Sweet Caroline, Jessica and Mark circulating among their guests with practiced charm. The Preston family holding court at their tables like benevolent royalty who had magnanimously welcomed the Clarks into their orbit. Something shifted in me as I sat there, invisible at the periphery of my own family's milestone event. Not anger exactly, but a quiet certainty that had been building since Grandma Ruth first taught me to read investment statements and recognize value where others saw only numbers on a page. I understood with sudden clarity that I had been investing in the wrong relationship portfolio my entire life, pouring emotional capital into connections that offered minimal returns while ignoring opportunities for growth elsewhere. When the band announced the cutting of the cake, I slipped out of the reception hall without anyone noticing my departure. Outside in the warm evening air, away from the controlled climate and carefully curated atmosphere of Jessica's perfect day, I took my first deep breath in hours. My phone contained no messages asking about my whereabouts or expressing concern about my absence. The realization didn't hurt as it once might have. Instead, it felt like confirmation of a hypothesis long suspected, but finally proven. I drove home to my apartment, kicked off the uncomfortable heels I'd worn to meet expectations, and sat at my small desk where I kept financial records and investment updates. Grandma Ruth's inheritance had grown steadily under my careful management, supplemented by my own systematic contributions from each paycheck. The total hadn't seemed particularly significant when viewed as a sequence of incremental increases. But now, looking at the cumulative figure, I recognized its potential. The Winchester Mansion on Maple Avenue had been featured in the local business newsletter that crossed my desk at the bank. A historic Victorian that had fallen into foreclosure. It was heading to auction with a starting bid that represented a fraction of its potential value once restored. The location was prime, the most prestigious street in the historic district, where property values had increased steadily regardless of broader market fluctuations. The newsletter mentioned that several developers had expressed interest, including Preston Holdings, Mark's family's investment firm. At the time, I'd set the information aside as professionally interesting, but personally irrelevant. Now, I pulled up the listing on my laptop and began to calculate in earnest purchase costs, estimated renovation expenses, potential tax benefits for historic restoration, projected value after improvements. The numbers aligned with surprising clarity, transforming from abstract figures into a concrete possibility. I thought about Jessica in her designer wedding dress, dismissing me from the family table. I thought about Mark's father toasting exceptional young people while barely acknowledging my existence. I thought about my parents, who had never once suggested I might be capable of anything truly remarkable. I thought about Grandma Ruth, who had seen value where others saw only adequacy. The decision crystallized not from spite, but from something more powerful. The recognition of my own capacity to build something meaningful while everyone else was busy decorating the surface of their lives. By midnight, I had drafted an offer letter and prepared the necessary financial documentation. By morning, I would contact an attorney to establish a holding company to manage the purchase. And by the time Jessica and Mark returned from their honeymoon in Bali, I would own the property they had assumed would be their first home as husband and wife, not as an act of revenge, but as my first deliberate step into a life measured by my own standards, instead of the leftover expectations from a family narrative that had never quite found space for me. I closed my laptop, a sense of calm purpose, replacing the lingering sting of the wedding day humiliation. The quiet sister at the back table was about to rewrite her own story, and no one, not even Jessica, would see it coming until it was already accomplished. The morning after Jessica's wedding, I woke with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. My apartment was quiet, sunlight filtering through blinds I hadn't bothered to close the night before. For a moment, I simply lay there, feeling the weight of decades of accommodation lifting from my chest, replaced by a sense of possibility that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The blue dress I'd worn to the reception lay draped over my reading chair, a reminder of yesterday's humiliation and, more importantly, yesterday's resolution. I made coffee, stronger than usual, and opened my laptop at the kitchen counter. The Winchester Mansion listing was still open in my browser, the stately Victorian with its wraparound porch and ornate gables seeming to look back at me with patient dignity. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement, one of architectural significance, historical value, and social standing in Oakridge. The Preston family's interest made perfect sense. The property represented exactly the kind of established prestige they cultivated through country club memberships and monogrammed towels. By 9 o'clock, I had emailed Patricia Winters, a real estate attorney I'd met through the bank who specialized in complex transactions. By 11, we were sitting in her downtown office, my financial documents spread between us on her gleaming mahogany desk. "This is an interesting move, Emily," Patricia said, examining my proposal with professional detachment. "The Winchester place has potential, but it needs substantial work. The Prestons have been circling it for weeks. Word is they're waiting for the price to drop further before making an offer." She looked up, shrewd eyes assessing me over reading glasses. "May I ask why this property specifically interests you?" I maintained a neutral expression, one I'd perfected through years of family dinners where my achievements were mentioned as afterthoughts. "It's undervalued relative to the neighborhood. The historical designation offers tax advantages, and the renovation costs, while significant, still place the total investment below projected market value after restoration." I handed her another spreadsheet with my calculations. "It's simply a sound investment." Patricia's lips curved in a slight smile. "Purely financial considerations, then." "Isn't that the most practical approach to property investment?" She nodded, conceding the point. "We'll need to move quickly and discreetly. For transactions of this nature, I recommend establishing a holding company as the purchasing entity. It adds a layer of privacy and offers liability protection during renovation." She pulled out a legal pad, making rapid notes. "I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. How would you like to name the company?" I hadn't considered this detail. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, "Ruth Investments, LLC." Patricia didn't ask for the significance, simply nodded and continued writing. "I suggest making an all-cash offer slightly above asking price, with an accelerated closing timeline. That should discourage the seller from entertaining other bids." She looked up again. "Are you prepared to move that quickly?" "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I've done the calculations. I can liquidate enough from my portfolio without disrupting my long-term investment strategy." 2 hours later, I walked out of Patricia's office with a plan in motion. By Wednesday, Ruth Investments, LLC would be legally established. By Friday, our offer would be presented. And if all went according to plan, by the end of the month, I would own the Winchester Mansion while Jessica and Mark were still sending honeymoon photos from their overwater bungalow in Bali. The reality of what I was doing didn't fully hit me until I was back at work on Monday, processing commercial loan applications as if this were any ordinary week, as if I hadn't set in motion a plan that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family. During my lunch break, my mother called, her voice bright with post-wedding euphoria. "Emily, there you are. We missed you at the gift opening yesterday. Where did you disappear to after the reception?" I hadn't been invited to any gift opening. I had a headache, I said, the lie coming easily after years of making excuses for my absence in family narratives. How was it? Oh, just lovely. The Prestons hosted at their home. You should see their place, Emily. It's absolutely spectacular. Hand-painted wallpaper in the dining room, if you can imagine. She continued detailing the Preston home's features before transitioning to Jessica's gifts. The silver service her grandfather gave them is museum quality. And Mark's firm partners went in on a crystal chandelier for their new house, whenever they find the right one, of course. They haven't found a house yet? I asked, knowing perfectly well they hadn't. Mark has his heart set on that old Victorian on Maple. You know, the Winchester place? His family has some connection to it historically, apparently. They're waiting for the right moment to make an offer. Mark's father says patience is key in real estate negotiations. The satisfied smugness in her tone suggested she was already rehearsing how she would describe her daughter's historic home to her friends. Sounds like they have it all planned out, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. They do. Jessica's always been so good at visualizing what she wants and making it happen. A pause, and then, almost as an afterthought, how are things with you, dear? Still enjoying the bank? Everything's fine, I said, glancing at the email that had just arrived from Patricia confirming our meeting tomorrow to sign the LLC paperwork. Just busy with work. Well, don't work too hard. You should try to get out more. Meet some nice young man. Jessica says one of Mark's colleagues is recently divorced, early 30s, no children, very stable career. Would you like me to mention you to Jessica? No, thank you, I said firmly. I'm focusing on my career right now. Oh, Emily, she sighed, the familiar note of disappointment creeping in. You're not getting any younger, you know, and with your sister married now. She let the implication hang that somehow Jessica's marital status increased the urgency of my own need to find a partner, as if happiness followed a prescribed timeline that I was already falling behind on. I should get back to work, I said, ending the conversation before it could descend further into territory we'd covered countless times before. Give Dad my love. I will. And Emily, do try to return those calls from the family. Everyone noticed. You left early, and Aunt Meredith thought you seemed upset about something. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the spreadsheet on my computer screen without really seeing it. It was remarkable how little my mother actually knew me, how readily she accepted the simplified version of Emily, reliable, steady, slightly disappointing, without ever questioning whether there might be depths she'd failed to notice, or ambitions she'd never bothered to ask about. The LLC paperwork was signed on Tuesday. On Friday, Patricia presented our offer to the bank handling the Winchester foreclosure. 15% above asking price, all cash, with a 20-day closing period and minimal contingencies. By Monday morning, we had acceptance. The property would be mine within 3 weeks, pending final paperwork and fund transfers. Congratulations, Patricia said when she called with the news. You've just made an excellent investment. The seller was quite impressed with the strength of your offer. Apparently, they had another interested party who kept delaying, hoping the price would drop further. Her voice held a note of professional satisfaction. Their hesitation was our opportunity. That evening, I drove past the Winchester mansion on my way home from work, allowing myself to pause across the street to really look at my future property. The fading sunlight caught on the leaded glass of the bay windows, illuminating the intricate woodwork of the wraparound porch. The house needed work: peeling paint, a sagging section of gutter, overgrown shrubbery partially obscuring the lower windows, but the bones were magnificent. 3 stories of Victorian craftsmanship, built when people constructed houses to last generations. As I sat there, a sleek BMW pulled up in front of the house. Mark's father emerged, accompanied by a man in a suit carrying what looked like architectural plans. They stood on the sidewalk, gesturing toward various features of the house, clearly discussing renovation possibilities. Mr. Preston pointed toward the third-floor turret, then swept his arm to indicate the side yard, his expression confident and proprietary, a man accustomed to acquiring whatever caught his interest. I sank lower in my seat, unreasonable anxiety fluttering in my chest, despite knowing they had no claim to the property that was now legally, if not yet publicly, mine. After a few minutes, they returned to the car and drove away, unaware that their planning was already obsolete, their assumptions about the future already invalidated by the quiet decisions of someone they barely registered as present in their world. The closing process proceeded with methodical precision. Patricia handled the legal intricacies while I arranged for the funds to be transferred, taking satisfaction in signing each document that brought me closer to ownership. I hired a security company to install a basic system and change the locks immediately after closing, and began researching restoration specialists with experience in historic properties. Jessica and Mark returned from their honeymoon 2 days after I received the keys to the Winchester mansion. My phone lit up with a text from Jessica later that evening. Finally back in civilization. Dinner at Mom and Dad's tomorrow to show honeymoon pics. 6 p.m. Wear something nice. Mark's parents coming too. The implied command to wear something nice sent a familiar surge of irritation through me, but I texted back a simple confirmation. This family dinner would be different from all those that came before, though no one but me would know it yet. I selected a simple black dress for the occasion, one I'd worn to bank functions, professional, understated, but of notably better quality than what I typically wore to family gatherings. A small rebellion, but one that pleased me as I prepared. To sit through an evening of honeymoon photographs and Preston family pronouncements. My parents' house was unchanged. The same carefully arranged family photos dominated by Jessica's milestones. The same furniture positioned to showcase the antique coffee table Mom had inherited from her aunt. The same subtle tension in my shoulders as I crossed the threshold into a space where I'd always been accessory rather than essential. "Emily, there you are." Mom air-kissed near my cheek, already turning back toward the living room. "Everyone's here. Jessica's just about to start showing the honeymoon slides." The Prestons were arranged on the sofa, Jessica and Mark beside. Them, my father hovering with offers of drinks. Mr. Preston nodded vaguely in my direction as I entered, his attention immediately returning to the digital frame Mark was setting up. Jessica glanced up, her newlywed glow momentarily dimmed as she assessed my appearance with quick, calculating eyes. "Oh, good. You found something appropriate," she said by way of greeting, the faint surprise in her tone making it clear she'd expected less. "We're just getting to the resort photos. Sit anywhere you can find space." The available space turned out to be a hard-backed chair from the dining room, positioned slightly behind the main seating arrangement. From this vantage point, I was technically included but had to lean forward to properly see the display screen, a physical manifestation of my peripheral status in family gatherings. For the next 45 minutes, we progressed through endless photos of Jessica and Mark posed against increasingly exotic backdrops, on the deck of their overwater bungalow, at sunset on a private beach, in matching robes at the resort spa. Each image was accompanied by Jessica's detailed commentary about 5-star service and exclusive experiences, with Mark occasionally adding anecdotes about surprising Jessica with upgraded amenities or special arrangements he'd made through his father's connections. "Mark arranged a private dinner on the beach our last night," Jessica gushed, displaying a photo of a canopy-covered table surrounded by flaming torches. The resort manager told us they'd never set up quite that configuration before, but Mark was very persuasive. She squeezed his arm adoringly, the implication clear. Mark's family name and wealth opened doors that ordinary travelers couldn't access. "That's our boy," Mr. Preston said with satisfied pride. "Never settle for the standard offering when you can create something extraordinary." He glanced around my parents' modest living room, his expression suggesting he was applying considerable goodwill to find the setting acceptable. "Speaking of extraordinary," Mark said, setting down his wine glass, "we should talk about our house hunting plans. Dad, did you have a chance to speak with the bank about the Winchester place?" My pulse quickened slightly, but I maintained a neutral expression, taking a small sip of wine as Mr. Preston leaned forward with the confident air of someone accustomed to delivering good news. "I did, and it's a bit of a mixed situation. The property has been sold." He held up a hand to forestall Mark's immediate frown. "But don't worry. I've already made some inquiries about approaching the new owner with an offer. These investment companies often flip properties quickly for the right price." "Sold?" Jessica's voice rose slightly. "But you said they were waiting for a better offer. You said we had time." "That was the indication I received from my contact," Mr. Preston replied, his tone suggesting this minor setback was merely a temporary inconvenience. "Someone came in with an all-cash offer significantly above asking price. Very unusual for that property in its current condition." "Who bought it?" Mark asked, frustration evident in his clipped tone. "Some holding company, Ruth Investments, LLC. My contact couldn't provide details on the principals involved, but I've got our attorney looking into it." Mr. Preston's confidence never wavered. These corporate entities are usually open to negotiation, especially when they realize who's interested in the property. I felt a strange, quiet power in sitting silently while this conversation unfolded, knowing what they didn't, watching them make assumptions based on incomplete information. It was a novel sensation, possessing knowledge that would dramatically alter their understanding of the situation while they remained oblivious to my significance. For perhaps the first time in my life within this family circle, I knew something important that no one else did, and the knowledge hummed under my skin like a physical presence. "I can't believe someone swooped in while we were away," Jessica said, turning to our parents with the expectation of sympathetic outrage. "That house would have been perfect for us. The location, the historical significance, the space for entertaining, it had everything." "There'll be other houses, sweetheart," Mom soothed, though her disappointment was evident. She'd clearly been anticipating social capital from having her daughter in Oakridge's most prestigious historic home. "Not like the Winchester place," Mark said, his jaw tight with thwarted entitlement. "That house has been in Oakridge social circles for generations. My grandfather used to attend parties there when the original owners still held their annual Christmas gala." "Well," Dad offered awkwardly, "maybe this Ruth Investments will realize they've taken on more than they can handle with the renovations. Historic properties are notoriously expensive to restore properly." I took another small sip of wine, unsure whether the warm sensation spreading through me was the alcohol or the delicious irony of the situation. I had spent years making myself smaller in this family, accepting whatever space they permitted me to occupy. Now I owned the very thing they coveted most, and they had no idea. "I've got to call into a developer friend," Mr. Preston continued, his confidence unshaken. "Sometimes these LLCs are just fronts for quick flips. We'll figure out who's really behind it and make them an offer they can't refuse." He delivered this last line with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to business obstacles dissolving before his determination. The conversation shifted to other potential properties, none quite measuring up to the Winchester mansion, but potentially acceptable alternatives if necessary. I contributed little. My non-committal responses interpreted as my usual quiet demeanor, rather than the calculated restraint it actually was. When dinner was announced, I helped Mom carry dishes to the table, falling into familiar patterns of utility. "Jessica looks wonderful, doesn't she?" Mom murmured as we arranged serving platters. "Marriage suits her, and the Prestons are such a good connection for our family." She patted my arm with distracted affection. "Don't worry, we'll find someone. For you too, eventually. Not everyone blooms at the same time." The irony of her accidentally echoing Grandma Ruth's flower metaphor wasn't lost on me. "I'm not worried," I replied truthfully. "I'm exactly where I need to be right now." She misinterpreted my meaning, of course, offering a sympathetic smile before returning to the dining room with the glazed carrots, leaving me momentarily alone in the kitchen. I stood there briefly, contemplating the parallel timelines unfolding. The one my family perceived, where Emily remained a subsidiary character in Jessica's ongoing narrative of achievement, and the reality, where I was quietly building something that would soon force a complete recalibration of their understanding. Dinner conversations centered on Jessica and Mark's plans, his partnership track at the Preston family law firm, their social engagements for the coming months, and of course, their continuing house hunt. Mr. Preston dominated with anecdotes about business connections and country club politics, while Mrs. Preston offered occasional comments about suitable neighborhoods for young couples of your caliber. My parents contributed enthusiastic support for every Preston pronouncement, clearly delighted by their daughter's elevation into this sphere. "Emily," Mrs. Preston said suddenly during a lull in conversation, her attention turning to me with the slightly surprised air of someone noticing a piece of furniture they'd overlooked. "Jessica mentioned you work at a bank. How nice. Is it that little credit union on Oak Street?" "Oakridge Community Bank," I corrected politely. "I'm in the commercial lending department." "Oh, well that's responsible." Her tone suggested this was the highest praise she could muster for such an ordinary occupation. "Do you enjoy it?" "Very much," I replied. "I particularly enjoy analyzing investment opportunities and assessing property valuations. It provides excellent perspective on the local real estate market." Mr. Preston's attention shifted slightly in my direction. Professional interest momentarily peaked. "Any insights on the commercial development they're planning for the Old Mill District? I've heard conflicting reports about the timeline." For several minutes, I found myself engaged in actual conversation about municipal zoning changes and commercial property trends, a subject I was genuinely knowledgeable about through my work. Mr. Preston seemed mildly surprised by my informed responses, while Mark watched with a slight frown, apparently unsettled by his father's momentary engagement with his wife's plain sister. "Emily's always been good with practical matters," Jessica interjected, effectively redirecting attention. "Speaking of practical, Mom, did you call about those dining chairs we saw in the catalog? They'd be perfect temporary pieces until we find our permanent house." The brief moment of visibility closed as quickly as it had opened. I returned to the background of the family tableau, finishing my dinner in relative silence while the conversation resumed its established patterns around me. Yet something had shifted subtly within me, a reinforcement of my resolve, a confirmation that the path I'd chosen was not just about acquiring a property, but about claiming space in a world that had consistently minimized my presence. After dinner, as Jessica shared wedding gift photos on her phone with Mrs. Preston, Mark approached me in the kitchen where I was helping load the dishwasher. His expression held the faintly bemused quality of someone making an obligatory effort toward inclusivity. "So, banking," he said, leaning against the counter with studied casualness. "Jessica mentioned you're pretty comfortable with numbers and such." I arranged silverware in the dishwasher caddy with methodical precision. "It's what I studied in college." "Listen," he continued, lowering his voice slightly. "Since you work in that world, if you hear anything about this Ruth Investments company, or if any information crosses your desk about the Winchester property, you'll let us know, right? For Jessica's sake, she's really got her heart set on that house." The presumption that I would pass along privileged professional information, potentially violating banking ethics, simply because he and Jessica wanted something, was so perfectly emblematic of their worldview that I almost laughed. Instead, I closed the dishwasher door and straightened to meet his gaze directly. "That would be a breach of client confidentiality," I said evenly. "But if I hear anything through public channels, I'll certainly pass it along." He blinked, clearly unused to anything but immediate accommodation. Right, of course. I just meant, well, family helps family, you know? And we're family now. He offered a smile that I supposed was meant to be charming, the kind that likely worked on everyone from restaurant hostesses to business associates. Yes, I agreed, my own smile polite but opaque. Family. Later that evening, after extricating myself from coffee and dessert with claims of an early meeting the next day, I drove not to my apartment, but to Maple Avenue. The Winchester mansion stood silhouetted against the night sky, its graceful proportions visible even in the darkness. I parked across the street and used my key to enter, stepping carefully through empty rooms that smelled of dust and possibility. I switched on the small battery-powered lantern I'd brought, its glow illuminating original crown moldings, a curved staircase with intricately carved balusters, and built-in bookcases flanking a limestone fireplace. The house had good bones. As Grandma Ruth would have said, solid craftsmanship beneath years of neglect, value overlooked by those focused only on surface appearances. In the formal dining room, I set the lantern on the dusty floor and turned slowly, imagining how the space would look restored, not to showcase Preston family dinners and Jessica's carefully curated table settings, but transformed into something entirely different. The idea that had been forming since I'd first considered purchasing the property crystallized in that moment. This house could become more than a residence. It could become a purpose. Grandma Ruth had always spoken of financial literacy as a form of freedom, particularly for women. She'd taught me to read investment prospectuses and calculate compound interest when other girls my age were learning to coordinate outfits and practice flirtatious laughter. What if this house, this symbol of established wealth and social position, became a center for the kind of practical education that created true independence? Standing in the empty dining room where Oakridge's elite had once gathered for formal parties, I envisioned workshops on investing for beginners, seminars on first time, home buying, classes on retirement planning for women in transition. The grand parlor could accommodate lectures, the library could house financial resources, the spacious kitchen could be modernized for events and community gatherings. The third floor, with its separate entrance and private spaces, could become my personal apartment, connected to but distinct from the public purpose of the main house. It wasn't revenge driving this vision. It was reclamation. Taking a symbol of the world that had consistently underestimated me and repurposing it to serve those who, like me, had been taught to expect less than they deserved. Jessica and Mark wanted the Winchester mansion as a status symbol. I would transform it into something with actual substance. I left the house that night with renewed purpose, stopping at my apartment only long enough to grab my laptop before setting up at an all-night coffee shop to outline a business plan. By morning, I had the framework for the Ruth Clark Foundation for Financial Independence, a nonprofit organization that would offer education, resources, and mentorship with a particular focus on women and marginalized communities typically excluded from conversations about wealth building. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved between my normal work responsibilities, planning meetings with contractors about the mansion's restoration, and quiet research into establishing a nonprofit foundation. My family, assuming I was going about my usual unremarkable routines, made little effort to include me in the ongoing drama of Jessica and Mark's house hunting. Mom called occasionally with updates I hadn't requested about properties they'd viewed, and found wanting, each lacking some essential quality that the Winchester place had possessed. Mark's father is still trying to contact that investment company, she reported during one such call. But apparently they're not responding to inquiries, so inconsiderate when they must know the property has significant local interest. The irony of her indignation over perceived inconsideration was apparently lost on her. Then came the legal notice. 3 weeks after my purchase of the Winchester mansion, Jessica and Mark filed a formal complaint against Ruth Investments, LLC, alleging unfair business practices and requesting the court to invalidate the sale on procedural grounds. Their claim, based on questionable legal reasoning and a creative interpretation of local historical preservation ordinances, wouldn't hold up to scrutiny, but it necessitated a response and required me to appear in court through legal representation. Patricia called the morning the papers were served to the LLC's registered address, her law office. "Well," she said, a note of dry amusement in her voice, "it seems the Prestons don't accept defeat easily. This complaint is mostly nonsense, but we'll need to respond." She paused. "Since this is going to court, your identity as the owner will become public record. Are you prepared for that?" The question gave me momentary pause. Until now, my ownership had been a private knowledge, a quiet certainty I carried through family dinners and polite conversations. Once revealed, there would be no returning to the comfortable invisibility I'd occupied for most of my life. Jessica's reaction would be explosive, my parents' confusion painful, the Prestons' indignation potentially socially and professionally complicated. Yet beneath these concerns lay a deeper truth. I had purchased the Winchester Mansion not just as an investment, but as a declaration of independence. What purpose did such a declaration serve if it remained unheard? "Yes," I told Patricia, my voice steady. "I'm prepared. Let's proceed as necessary." The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday in the Oakridge County Courthouse, stately brick building downtown where I'd only ever been for jury duty. Patricia advised me to attend but prepared me for a relatively straightforward proceeding. The judge would review the complaint, hear brief arguments from both legal teams, and likely dismiss the case on the spot given its tenuous legal basis. "Wear something professional but not flashy," she suggested. "First impressions matter in these situations, especially when the opposing counsel will attempt to portray Ruth Investments as a predatory corporate entity." I selected a navy suit I'd purchased for bank board meetings, simple pearl earrings that had belonged to Grandma Ruth, and low heels that wouldn't echo dramatically on the courthouse's marble floors. The goal wasn't to make a statement, but to present as the competent professional I was, regardless of how my family had categorized me. The morning of the hearing arrived with crystalline autumn clarity, sunlight streaming through changing leaves as I parked near the courthouse. Patricia met me on the steps, elegant in a charcoal pantsuit, a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. The Prestons are already inside with their attorney, Mitchell Browning from Caldwell and Reed. Old-school litigator tends toward theatrical arguments. Your sister and brother-in-law are with them, along with your parents. She assessed my expression, carefully. "Are you certain you're ready for this?" I nodded, adjusting my grandmother's pearls. "Absolutely." We entered courtroom C, a wood-paneled space with high ceilings and uncomfortable wooden benches. The Preston contingent occupied the plaintiff's side, Mark's father in conversation with a silver-haired attorney, Mrs. Preston and my mother whispering. Together, Jessica and Mark sitting rigidly in the first row, and my father looking distinctly uncomfortable in a suit that suggested this was a more formal occasion than he'd anticipated. None of them glanced toward the entrance as Patricia and I slipped into seats on the defendant's side. I positioned myself slightly behind Patricia, visible but not prominently so, my heartbeat steady despite the significance of the moment unfolding. For 28 years, I had been Emily the reliable, Emily the adequate, Emily the afterthought. In moments, that perception would be irreversibly altered, not through any dramatic declaration on my part, but through the simple, factual revelation of my actions. Judge Harriman entered, a woman in her 60s with practical cropped gray hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. The proceedings began with formal introductions, Mitchell Browning for the plaintiffs, Patricia Winters for the defendant. The judge reviewed the filed documents with efficient precision before looking up over her glasses. "Mr. Browning, I've read your complaint. Before we proceed, I'd like clarification on your claim that the sale violated historical preservation ordinances. Which specific provisions are you alleging were breached?" Browning rose, adjusting his tie with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, The Winchester property falls under Ordinance 47B of the Oakridge Historical District Code, which requires that sales of designated historical properties include a review period by the Preservation Board. Our contention is that Ruth Investments circumvented this process through their accelerated closing timeline. Judge Harriman frowned slightly. Ms. Winters, your response? Patricia stood, calm and precise. Your Honor, Ordinance 47B applies only to properties being purchased for commercial redevelopment. Ruth Investments acquired the Winchester property for restoration in keeping with its historical character and for residential use, which is exempt from the review requirement. We've included documentation of our restoration plans, which have already been approved by the Historical Preservation Board, in our response. The legal exchange continued for several minutes, with Browning attempting increasingly creative interpretations of local ordinances and Patricia systematically dismantling each argument. I watched Jessica and Mark whispering urgently to each other as the weakness of their case became apparent. Mr. Preston's confident posture gradually stiffening with frustration. Finally, Judge Harriman held up a hand. I've heard enough. The complaint lacks merit on all counts. The sale was conducted legally, all required procedures were followed, and the current owner has demonstrated clear commitment to proper historical preservation. She shuffled some papers before continuing. For the record, can we clarify who exactly is the principal behind Ruth Investments, LLC? This was the moment. Patricia turned slightly toward me, offering an almost imperceptible nod. I stood, smoothing my navy skirt. Your Honor, I am the sole owner of Ruth Investments, LLC. My name is Emily Clark. The silence that followed was absolute. Jessica turned in her seat, scanning the courtroom until her gaze found me standing quietly on the opposite side. Her expression transformed from confusion to shock to something approaching horror as recognition dawned. Mark's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. My father half rose from his seat before sinking back down, his face a study in bewilderment. Judge Harriman, unaware of the personal drama unfolding before her, simply nodded and made a notation. Thank you, Ms. Clark. This case is dismissed. The purchase was legal in all respects. She gathered her papers and stood. Court is adjourned. As the judge exited, the courtroom erupted into urgent whispers. The Preston legal team huddled with Mark's father, while Jessica remained frozen, staring at me as if I'd suddenly appeared out of thin air despite having been in the room the entire time. My mother clutched my father's arm, her expression suggesting she was physically recalibrating her understanding of reality. I gathered my belongings calmly, thanked Patricia for her excellent representation, and walked toward the exit. Halfway, there, Jessica intercepted me, her perfect features distorted with confusion and budding outrage. Emily? Her voice was higher than usual, strained with disbelief. What is this? What are you doing? I met her gaze steadily. I purchased a property, Jessica. It's a sound investment. But the Winchester place? How could you possibly afford it? And why didn't you tell us? I can afford it because I've been careful with my finances. For years. As for telling you, I glanced toward the Preston legal team still in animated conversation with Mark's father. It seems clear that if I had, there would have been efforts to interfere with my purchase. Mark approached, his expression hardening from confusion to anger. This isn't about money, he said, voice low but intense. This is about you trying to get back at Jessica for something. What is it? The wedding seating? That was just practical. Mark's godmother needed to be at the family table. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a strange compassion beneath my resolve. No, Mark. This is about me finally doing something for myself without considering Jessica at all. The truth of this statement seemed to hit Jessica harder than any accusation might have. The concept that I had made a significant life decision, without factoring her preferences into the equation was apparently more shocking than the purchase itself. "You're saying you bought our dream house? Just because you wanted it?" Her incredulity was almost childlike in its transparency. "It's not your dream house," I replied evenly. "It's my actual house. And yes, I bought it because I saw its value and had a vision for its future." My parents approached cautiously, as if unsure of their role in this unfolding scene. Mom's expression cycled between confusion and the beginnings of her practiced social damage control. "Emily, sweetheart," she began, her voice pitched to soothe while simultaneously signaling that a family matter should not be discussed in public. "Let's talk about this at home. I'm sure we can work something out that makes everyone happy." "There's nothing to work out," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "The house is mine, purchased legally and ethically. I have plans for it that don't include selling." Mr. Preston joined our increasingly awkward cluster, his considerable height and tailored suit creating an imposing presence clearly intended to intimidate. "Ms. Clark," he said, dropping all pretense of family connection, "I think we should discuss this matter privately. I'm prepared to make a very generous offer for the property, one that would represent a substantial profit on your investment." I met his gaze with a calm I wouldn't have believed myself capable of even a month earlier. "Thank you, Mr. Preston, but the Winchester mansion isn't for sale, at any price." "Everyone has a price," he responded, the affable mask slipping to reveal the calculation beneath. "Name yours." "Some things aren't about price," I said. "Some things are about purpose." Before he could respond, I turned to my still stunned, "Amino, I need to get back to work. We can discuss this another time if you'd like." With a polite nod to the assembled group, I continued toward the courthouse exit, aware of their collective stare following my departure, but not turning back to acknowledge it. Outside in the autumn sunshine, I took a deep breath of crisp air, feeling strangely buoyant despite the confrontation. The secret was out. Emily the Reliable had made a move no one saw coming, claimed space no one believed she deserved, and stood her ground when challenged. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunshine warmed my face as I walked to my car, each step feeling lighter than the last. The revelation was complete, the truth laid bare in the most official way possible, through court records and legal proceedings that couldn't be dismissed as misunderstanding or exaggeration. For the first time in my life, I had claimed space not on the periphery, but at the center of my family's awareness, and I had done so not through desperate bids for attention, but through quiet competence and clear vision. My phone began buzzing. Before I even reached the parking lot, Jessica's name flashing insistently on the screen, followed by my mother's, then my father's. I silenced the ringer and slipped the phone into my purse. Whatever conversations needed to happen would happen on my terms now, not in a flurry of reactive explanations while standing in a public parking lot. At the bank, I completed my afternoon, appointments with a focus that surprised even me, my mind clear despite the morning's confrontation. My colleagues noticed nothing unusual, unaware that the quiet Emily Clark who processed commercial loan applications and maintained meticulous spreadsheets had just dramatically altered her family's perception of her capabilities. The disconnect between my internal revolution and external continuity felt almost amusing. How utterly we are defined by others' limited understanding of who we are. By 5 o'clock, my phone showed 17 missed calls and a cascade of text messages ranging from Jessica's all-caps demands, "Call me right now, we need to talk about what you did," to my mother's guilt-laden pleas, "Please call, your father and I are very confused and hurt," to a surprising message from Mark's father. "Ms. Clark, Preston Holdings would like to schedule a formal meeting to discuss mutually beneficial arrangements regarding the Winchester property. Please have your attorney contact my office." I responded to none of them, driving instead directly to the Winchester mansion, where I had arranged to meet Catherine Reynolds, a contractor specializing in historical renovations. She was waiting on the front porch, a sturdy woman in her 50s, with practical work boots and a portfolio of photographs documenting her previous restorations. "Ms. Clark," she greeted me, extending a calloused hand. "Beautiful property you've acquired. Needs work, of course, but the structural integrity is excellent considering its age." We toured the house methodically, Catherine pointing out original features worth preserving, necessary repairs, and potential modifications that would accommodate modern needs while respecting historical character. She spoke with a straightforward expertise that made no assumptions about my knowledge or intentions, a refreshing contrast to the day's earlier interactions. "The third floor could make an excellent private residence," she noted as we examined the turret rooms with their curved walls and bay windows. Separate entrance from the side staircase, good natural light, enough square footage for comfortable living while keeping the main floors available for whatever purpose you have in mind. "That's exactly what I was thinking," I said, explaining my vision for the Ruth Clark Foundation and the educational center I hoped to establish in the main portion of the house. Catherine nodded approvingly. "Thoughtful repurposing. Too many of these old places get gutted for flashy updates that ignore their history. Or worse, left to deteriorate because people can't see beyond what they were to what they could become." She made notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "I'd be interested in this project, Ms. Clark. My team specializes in bringing historical properties into new chapters of usefulness without sacrificing their character." By the time Catherine left with promises to prepare a detailed proposal within the week, twilight was deepening around the mansion. I stood on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker on along Maple Avenue, acutely aware that I was standing on my own property. Not an apartment I rented, not a childhood bedroom I was permitted to occupy, but a significant piece of Oakridge history that belonged to me through my own strategic planning and financial discipline. My phone buzzed again. This time, I answered. Emily Clark speaking. "Emily." My father's voice sounded strained, tentative in a way I'd rarely heard. "Your mother and I would like to talk to you, in person. Could you come by the house this evening?" I considered the request, weighing my desire for continued independence against the inevitability of this conversation. "I can stop by around 8, I replied. "But I can't stay long. I have an early meeting tomorrow." That would be fine." He paused, clearing his throat. "Jessica and Mark might be here too. They have questions." Of course they did. "I understand. I'll see you at 8. The familiar drive to my parents' house felt different now. Less a return to established patterns and more a deliberate choice to engage on new terms. I parked in the driveway rather than at the curb where I typically left my car to keep the more convenient spots open for others. Another small act of claiming space. The front door opened before I reached it, my mother's anxious face appearing in the entryway. "Emily, come in. Come in." Her hands fluttered nervously, smoothing her already immaculate hair. Everyone's in the living room. Everyone indeed. My father occupied his usual armchair but sat forward rather than in his customary relaxed position. Jessica and Mark were arranged on the sofa, her expression tight with contained emotion, his professionally neutral but underlaid with annoyance. To my surprise, Mr. Preston was also present, standing near the fireplace with the air of someone accustomed to commanding attention in any room he entered. "Hello," I said simply, taking the remaining seat, a straight-backed chair near the entry, typically reserved for less familiar visitors rather than family members. A moment of uncomfortable silence followed, broken ultimately by Jessica, who seemed unable to contain herself any longer. "How could you do this?" The words burst from her like water through a cracked dam. "You knew we wanted that house. You sat right here while we talked about it, and you didn't say a word." "Yes," I acknowledged calmly. "I knew you were interested in the property." "Then why would you—" She gestured expansively, her wedding ring catching the light. "This makes no sense, Emily. You've never shown any interest in historic homes. You've always lived in modern apartments. What would you even do with all that space? I have plans for the property that align with my values and goals, I replied. The Ruth Clark Foundation for Financial Independence will offer education and resources for women and others traditionally excluded from financial literacy. A foundation? My mother looked genuinely baffled. But when did you start planning this? Why didn't you tell us? The question contained its own answer, evident in the room's arrangement. Jessica and Mark positioned centrally, Mr. Preston accorded the power position near the fireplace, my father in his established domain, and me in the visitor's chair despite having grown up in this house. Every family gathering had followed this same invisible choreography of importance. I didn't tell you because this decision wasn't about you, I said, the simple truth landing with surprising weight. It was a private investment decision that made sense for my financial and professional goals. But where did you get that kind of money? My father's question carried genuine bewilderment rather than accusation. The Winchester place must have cost. I had an inheritance from Grandma Ruth, I explained, which I've invested carefully over the years, along with my own savings. The property was undervalued relative to the neighborhood, and I secured favorable financing terms through my professional network. Mr. Preston stepped forward slightly, his expression calculating. Ms. Clark, while I admire entrepreneurial spirit, I think we should discuss this pragmatically. The Preston Foundation already supports numerous charitable initiatives. Perhaps we could structure a partnership that would allow your educational concept to proceed while transferring the property to Mark and Jessica, who have personal and family connections to its history. The offer was presented with practiced benevolence, the powerful man magnanimously offering to absorb the upstart's project under his established umbrella, a solution that would conveniently restore the proper order of things while appearing generous to all involved. Thank you for the suggestion, Mr. Preston, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. But the foundation and the property are not separate considerations. The Winchester Mansion itself, its history, its prominence, its symbolic status in Oakridge is integral to the mission. Having women learn about financial independence in a space historically reserved for established wealth creates a powerful statement about changing accessibility. Jessica made a sound of frustrated disbelief. This isn't about making statements. This is about our future home, the place we plan to raise our family. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't understand why you're doing this. Is it because of the wedding? Because I asked you to move tables? The question hung in the air, so reductive in its understanding of my motivations that it might have been amusing if it weren't so revealing. In Jessica's mind, my actions could only be understood as reaction to her wedding, to perceived slights, to jealousy of her marriage. The possibility that I might be acting from my own independent center of purpose remained literally incomprehensible to her. No, Jessica, I said gently. This isn't about the wedding or the seating arrangement. This is about me creating something meaningful that aligns with my values, independent of family expectations or dynamics. But we're family, she insisted, as if repeating this fact would inevitably bend reality back to its accustomed shape. Family doesn't do this to family. The echo of her wedding day rejection, excluding me from the family table, relegating me to the periphery while claiming the privileges of familial loyalty, was either unintentionally ironic or deliberately obtuse. Either way, I felt a surprising surge of compassion for her genuine confusion. Jessica had never had to consider that the family dynamics that had always centered her experience might look and feel entirely different from my position. I agree that families should support each other, I said carefully. Which is why I believe you'll come to respect my decision to create something valuable for the community, even if it's different from what you initially wanted. Mark leaned forward, his lawyer's instincts engaging. Let's be direct, Emily. What would it take for you to sell us the property? Name a price. We can be reasonable about this." "The house isn't for sale," I repeated, my voice even. "Not at any price." "Everyone has their price," Mr. Preston interjected, the same phrase he'd used at the courthouse, but now delivered with more calculated charm. "Perhaps you're considering the wrong type of compensation. Preston Holdings could offer significant advantages beyond mere financial consideration. Introductions to influential circles, professional opportunities, board positions that would amplify whatever mission you're envisioning." The offer revealed so much about how the Prestons viewed the world, as a series of transactional relationships where everything and everyone had a price, where principles were negotiable given sufficient incentive, and where access to their social sphere represented the ultimate currency. It was precisely the mindset I hoped to challenge through the Foundation's work. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but my decision isn't financially motivated, and therefore can't be financially influenced. The Winchester Mansion will become the Ruth Clark Foundation for Financial Independence. Construction begins next month, with an anticipated opening in the spring." "This is ridiculous," Jessica burst out, tears of frustration gathering in her eyes. "You're being deliberately difficult. You don't even like old houses." "Perhaps," my mother suggested tentatively, "we could find another historic property. For Jessica and Mark? Emily, you work at the bank. Surely you know of other properties coming available." The absurdity of her attempt at compromise, still prioritizing Jessica's preferences while expecting me to facilitate them despite having clearly established my own position, might have stung once. Now it merely highlighted how deeply ingrained these patterns had become, how reflexively my family positioned me as supporting cast rather than protagonist in my own life narrative. "I'm sure Mark's father has excellent real estate connections," I replied. "But my priority now is focusing on the renovations and establishing the Foundation's programming." My father, who had remained largely silent, finally spoke. "I don't understand where this is coming from, Emily. This isn't like you." His comment struck at the heart of the matter. "Actually, Dad, this is exactly like me. It's just that none of you have been paying close enough attention to notice who I really am, or what matters to me." The words weren't delivered with accusation, but as a simple observation of fact. Mr. Preston checked his watch with theatrical impatience. "This conversation seems to be circular. Emily, I'll have my attorney contact yours with a formal offer. I suggest you consider it carefully before making irrevocable decisions about the property." "Your attorney already knows how to reach Patricia Winters," I replied calmly. "But I can save everyone time and legal fees by being clear. The Winchester Mansion is not for sale, not open for negotiation, and not available for any arrangement that transfers ownership or control." "We'll see," he said, the vague response carrying an undercurrent of warning. With a nod to my parents and a significant, "Look at Mark," he excused himself, leaving a charged silence in his wake. Jessica stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "I never thought you could be this selfish," she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. "All my life, I've included you, looked out for you, tried to help you fit in better." The breathtaking revision of our shared history, casting her consistent marginalization of me as generous inclusion, was so sincere that I realized she genuinely believed this narrative. In her mind, permitting me to exist in her orbit, occasionally acknowledging my presence, and offering unsolicited advice about my appearance, had constituted sisterly generosity. "I appreciate that's how you remember things," I said carefully. My experience was somewhat different, but that's not what matters now. What matters is that I've made an independent decision about my life and my resources that doesn't require your approval or understanding. "How can you say that doesn't matter?" she demanded. "We're sisters. Everything we do affects each other." "Not anymore," I said gently. "Not in the way you mean. We can have a relationship as adult sisters who respect each other's choices, or we can have increasing distance. But what we can't have is a continuation of the dynamic where your preferences automatically supersede mine. Mark stood, placing a hand on Jessica's shoulder. "I think we should go," he said tightly. "This clearly isn't productive right now. Emily is not in a reasonable frame of mind." The dismissal, categorizing. My calm assertion of boundaries as unreasonable was so predictable that it almost made me smile. When faced with a woman who couldn't be persuaded, cajoled, or intimidated into compliance, the final refuge was always to question her rationality. "I understand this is disappointing for you both," I said, rising as well. "And I'm genuinely sorry that it's causing distress. But my decision stands." After they left, my parents remained in stunned silence for several moments. My mother looked tearfully between my father and me, clearly hoping he would somehow reset the situation to its familiar parameters. "Emily," he finally said, his voice heavy with confusion, "I don't know what's gotten into you lately. First missing the gift opening after the wedding, then barely participating in family dinners, and now this dramatic gesture. If you're going through something, we want to help, but this isn't the way to get attention." The reduction of my carefully planned investment, my vision for the foundation, my assertion of independence to a dramatic gesture seeking attention was the perfect distillation of how thoroughly they misunderstood both my actions and my character. In their framework, I remained the secondary daughter whose behavior could only be interpreted as a reaction to or bid for the centrality they automatically accorded Jessica. "I'm not going through anything, and I'm not seeking attention," I replied, gathering my purse. "I'm building something I believe in. The fact that none of you can conceptualize me acting from my own independent motivation, rather than in relation to Jessica, says more about your perspective than about my choices." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "You've always been so practical, so accommodating. I just don't understand this sudden change." "It's not sudden, Mom. It's been building for 28 years. You just weren't watching." I left them sitting in the living room, my father stunned, my mother tearful. The familiar weight of their expectations and misunderstandings finally lifted from my shoulders. Not because they had changed, but because I had stepped beyond their reach. The night air felt clean and sharp in my lungs as I drove away, not in retreat this time, but in advancement toward the future I was deliberately creating. The following weeks brought a predictable cycle of attempted interventions. Jessica alternated between tearful appeals to sisterly obligation and cold accusations of betrayal. Mark attempted reasoned arguments about investment returns and practical considerations, as if my decision must surely be financially irrational rather than simply prioritizing different values than his. My mother left increasingly plaintive, voicemails about family harmony and Jessica's distress. My father tried once, awkwardly, to suggest that I might be experiencing delayed grief over Grandma Ruth's passing that was manifesting as impulsive decisions. Mr. Preston, true to his word, had his attorney present a formal offer significantly above market value for the Winchester property. When that was declined, he attempted to leverage his considerable local influence to create obstacles, questioning the historical restoration permits, suggesting to municipal officials that the proposed foundation might increase traffic concerns, even approaching my bank's board chairman at a charity event to raise vague concerns about potential conflicts of interest in my professional role. None of these maneuvers gained traction. Patricia had ensured all permits and approvals were properly secured. The foundation's educational mission was wholly compatible with existing zoning, and my professional reputation at the bank was built on years of meticulous ethical conduct that couldn't be undermined by insinuation. Each failed attempt only reinforced what I had begun to truly understand. Power that derived from inherited position and social assumption was far more fragile than power built on competence and clear purpose. Throughout this period, renovation, work on the Winchester mansion proceeded steadily. Catherine's team began with structural necessities, roof repairs, modernizing electrical systems, addressing water damage in the East Wing. I visited the property several times weekly, sometimes to consult on specific restoration details, but often simply to witness the transformation unfolding under skilled hands that appreciated both what the house had been and what it could become. During one such visit, as Catherine and I discussed options for restoring the original stained glass in the landing window, a familiar car pulled up outside. Jessica emerged alone, noticeably less polished than usual in jeans and a simple sweater. Her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail reminiscent of her pre-college days. "Ms. Clark, should I?" Catherine glanced between me and the window, professional discretion warring with practical concern about potential confrontation disrupting the worksite. "It's fine," I assured her. "That's my sister. We can continue our discussion about the stained glass later." Jessica hesitated on the sidewalk, obviously uncertain about approaching the property she had so confidently claimed would be hers. I stepped onto the porch, acknowledging her presence with a nod but neither inviting nor discouraging her approach. "Can we talk?" she called, remaining by her car. "Just us?" I descended the porch steps and met her on the neutral territory of the front walkway. Up close, she looked tired, the perfect veneer of Jessica Clark Preston showing small fractures, a bitten nail, a missed spot while applying concealer under her eyes, a slightly frayed cuff on her otherwise immaculate sweater. "You can come inside if you'd like," I offered. "It's still under construction, but the parlor is clear." She glanced toward the house, conflict evident in her expression. "I'd rather walk if that's okay. There's a coffee shop around the corner." We strolled in silence past the elegant homes of Maple Avenue, the autumn leaves creating a golden canopy overhead and a crisp carpet beneath our feet. Jessica kept her gaze forward, hands tucked into her pockets, shoulders tight with tension. The coffee shop was a small independent place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Jessica ordered a complex latte with precise specifications. I chose simple black coffee. We settled at a corner table away from other patrons, the late morning lull providing relative privacy. "You look well," she said finally, stirring her latte without meeting my eyes. "Different somehow." "Thank you." I waited, letting her set the direction for this unexpected conversation. She took a sip of her drink, then set it down with deliberate care. "Mark and I found another house, on Linden Street, in the new development. It's very contemporary. Open concept, smart home features, that sort of thing." She delivered this information with studied neutrality that didn't quite mask her disappointment. "We close next week." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "I hope it becomes a wonderful home for you both." "It's not the Winchester place," she replied, a flash of the old Jessica breaking through. "It doesn't have the history or the character, or the social significance." She caught herself, straightening slightly. "But it's practical. Good investment in a growing area." I nodded, waiting for the real purpose behind this meeting to emerge. Jessica had never sought my company, simply to share housing updates, particularly not since the courtroom revelation. "Dad called me yesterday," she continued, tracing the rim of her cup with one manicured finger. "He said you haven't been to Sunday dinner in over a month. Mom's upset." "I've been busy with the renovation and foundation planning," I replied. "And I thought some distance might be healthy given recent tensions." "They're our parents, Emily. They don't understand what's happening with you." She looked up finally, meeting my gaze directly. "Neither do I, honestly. This isn't who you've always been." There it was again, the persistent inability to recognize that the quiet, accommodating Emily might have contained depths and ambitions entirely independent from the family's limited perception of her. Not a transformation, but a revelation of what had always existed beneath the surface they never bothered to look beyond. "This is exactly who I've always been," I said quietly. Someone with her own values, goals, and capabilities. The difference isn't in who I am, but in whether those aspects of me are visible or acknowledged. Jessica frowned slightly, struggling visibly with this concept. But you've never been assertive like this before. You've always gone along with things, been helpful with whatever needed doing. You've never challenged the family dynamic. And how has that family dynamic worked for me, Jessica? I asked, not unkindly. Have my needs, preferences, or achievements ever been centered the way yours routinely are? Has my perspective been sought or valued when family decisions are made? Have my accomplishments been celebrated with the same enthusiasm as yours? She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again, a flicker of uncomfortable recognition crossing her features. It's not. We didn't deliberately. She paused, regrouping. You never seemed to mind. I minded, I said simply. I just didn't think expressing that would change anything, so I accommodated instead. But I've grown beyond that now. She stirred her cooling latte, avoiding my gaze again. Mark's father is still angry. He says you're being deliberately obstinate to make some kind of point. Mr. Preston is accustomed to people and situations conforming to his expectations, I observed. When they don't, he interprets it as personal affront rather than legitimate difference. He had connections to that house, Jessica said defensively. His grandfather attended parties there in the 40s. There's family history. Attending parties in a house doesn't create ownership rights to it 70 years later, I pointed out. And whatever sentimental connection the Prestons feel toward the Winchester mansion doesn't supersede my legal ownership or my vision for its future. She sighed, tension visible in the set of her shoulders. He's being difficult about it at home, making comments, bringing it up at dinner. Mark is caught in the middle. For the first time, I glimpsed a potential crack in the perfect facade of Jessica's married life. The strain of navigating between her powerful father-in-law's expectations and her husband's attempts to manage them. The pressure of maintaining appearances when reality didn't align with the Preston family narrative. A small, petty part of me might have felt satisfaction at this evidence that Jessica's seemingly charmed existence contained its own complications. Instead, I felt a surprising surge of genuine concern for my sister. That sounds challenging, I said gently. I'm sorry it's creating tension for you and Mark. She looked up, momentarily startled by the sincerity in my tone. It's fine. We're managing. A pause, then with uncharacteristic candor. It's just different than I expected. Being a Preston, there are a lot of expectations. The hesitation in her voice, the careful selection of words, suggested complexities in her new life that she rarely acknowledged even to herself, let alone to others. For perhaps the first time, Jessica was sharing something real with me rather than a carefully curated presentation of her success. Expectations can be challenging to navigate, I agreed, thinking of the weight of family assumptions I'd carried throughout my life, especially when they conflict with your own sense of what's right or necessary. She studied me with new attention, as if seeing aspects of me she'd previously overlooked. Is that what this is about for you? The house? The foundation? It's about breaking free of expectations? Partly, I acknowledged. But it's more about creating something aligned with my values rather than simply reacting against constraints. The foundation represents what I believe in: financial education as a path to independence, particularly for women who've been taught that their security should come from others rather than from their own capability. Like Grandma Ruth taught you, Jessica said slowly, making the connection for the first time. The foundation is named for her. Yes. I felt a small bloom of hope that she might finally be understanding something essential about my motivations. She saw me clearly when most people didn't. She taught me skills that have served me well. I want to extend that legacy to others who might benefit from similar guidance. Jessica was quiet for a moment, turning her cup in small circles on the table. "I never really knew her that way," she said finally. "Grandma Ruth, I mean. She was just grandma to me. Someone who made cookies and gave birthday checks. I didn't realize she was teaching you things." The admission revealed so much about our different experiences within the same family. Jessica, centered and celebrated, had no need for the quiet mentorship that had become my lifeline. I, peripheral and overlooked, had found in Grandma Ruth's attention a validation otherwise absent from my family experience. "She was extraordinary," I said softly. "Practical and forward-thinking in an era when women were expected to focus only on domestic concerns." She understood the power of financial independence long before it was commonly discussed. "And now you're creating a whole foundation based on what she taught you," Jessica observed, a note of something almost like admiration creeping into her voice. "That's actually pretty impressive, Emily." The acknowledgement, small but sincere, felt like a first tentative step across a chasm that had separated us since childhood. Jessica beginning, perhaps for the first time, to see me as someone with legitimate capabilities and purpose rather than merely as her reliable, unremarkable sister. "Thank you," I said simply. She took a final sip of her latte, setting the cup down with a sense of decision. "Listen, I didn't just come to tell you about the new house. Mom's birthday is next weekend. She's pretending everything's fine, but she's really upset that the family is fractured right now. Would you consider coming to dinner on Saturday? Just family. Nothing formal." The invitation represented a practical olive branch, not an apology or full recognition of past imbalances, but a tentative acknowledgement that I belonged at the family table even if my choices weren't understood or approved. It was a small step, but perhaps a meaningful one. "I'd like that," I said after a moment's consideration. "I can come, but I won't discuss selling the Winchester mansion or changing plans for the foundation. If that's going to be the focus of conversation, it would be better for me to celebrate with Mom separately." Jessica nodded, accepting this boundary with surprising grace. "That's fair. I'll tell Mark to mention it to his father. Sometimes he drops by unexpectedly for family things, but this should just be us." She hesitated, then added, "And I'll try to make sure you're not seated by the kitchen door this time." The comment might have been intended as light humor, but it carried an undercurrent of recognition, acknowledgement, however small, of the patterns that had consistently positioned me at the margins of family gatherings. The fact that Jessica could now see this pattern clearly enough to reference it suggested a subtle shift in perspective that felt significant. As we walked back toward the Winchester mansion, our stride falling into unexpectedly comfortable synchronization, Jessica glanced sideways at me. "Would you maybe show me what you're doing with the house? The renovations and plans for the foundation? If that's okay, I mean. I'm curious." The request surprised me. Genuine interest in my project rather than focus on how it affected her plans or desires. It represented perhaps the beginning of Jessica seeing me as someone with legitimate ambitions worthy of attention, rather than merely as an extension of or support for her own narrative. "I'd like that," I said, leading the way up the walkway to the house that had become not just a property investment, but a physical manifestation of my emergence from the shadows of family expectation into the clear light of self-determined purpose. For the first time in decades, Maple Avenue witnessed genuine transformation. The Winchester Mansion's grand reopening as the Ruth Clark Foundation drew hundreds from Oakridge's community, each visitor stepping through restored oak doors into a space reimagined for purpose rather than prestige. 6 months of meticulous renovation had revealed the home's authentic beauty beneath layers of neglect, just as those same months had stripped away the carefully maintained illusions within my own family. The foundation's inaugural event coincided with an unexpected phone call that morning. My mother's voice, usually pitched with nervous energy when speaking to me, carried an unfamiliar quality, something approaching genuine curiosity rather than dutiful check-in or veiled criticism. "Emily, I've been thinking," she began, a phrase that once would have preceded gentle suggestions about weight loss or dating prospects. "About your grandmother. About the things she used to tell you when you spent all those evenings in her room." I held the phone closer, watching through my office window as caterers arranged refreshment tables in the mansion's restored garden. "What about her?" "She never taught me those things," my mother continued, the admission carrying weight. "The financial knowledge, the independence she stressed. I thought it was because I married young, but now I wonder if she saw something in you that I missed." The acknowledgement landed softly, years too late, yet somehow still meaningful. "Grandma Ruth believed in teaching people to build their own security," I replied. "That's what the foundation will do." "Yes," she said quietly. "I understand that now." The conversation ended with my parents' confirmed attendance at the opening, though neither Jessica nor Mark had responded to their invitation. Their silence spoke volumes about lingering tensions, yet as guests began arriving that afternoon, I found myself oddly at peace with their absence. The foundation existed independent of family validation, just as my worth had finally detached from their recognition. Catherine Reynolds, my lead contractor, guided architectural tours throughout the day, her weathered hands pointing out preserved original features with obvious pride. "The bones were always good," she told an appreciative crowd in the library. "Sometimes you just need someone with vision to see what's possible." By mid-afternoon, over 300 people had toured the facility, attended financial literacy, demonstrations, and expressed interest in upcoming programs. Local business leaders pledged support, women's organizations requested partnership opportunities, and the mayor himself offered municipal backing for our educational initiatives. Then, just as the crowd began thinning, a familiar BMW pulled into the circular drive. Mr. Preston emerged first, followed by Mark, and finally Jessica, who stepped carefully onto the restored brick pathway in heels that clicked with deliberate precision. They approached like diplomats entering foreign territory, Mr. Preston's usual commanding presence tempered by something resembling caution. Jessica kept her eyes fixed on the mansion's facade, as if seeing it clearly for the first time, while Mark maintained the careful neutrality of someone navigating between competing loyalties. "Miss Clark," Mr. Preston addressed me formally as they reached the entrance where I stood greeting departing guests. "Impressive gathering. May we speak privately?" I led them to the restored parlor, its period furniture arranged to encourage conversation rather than hierarchy. They sat stiffly on the edge of silk-upholstered chairs, while I remained standing, a reversal of power dynamics that wasn't lost on any of us. "I've consulted with my legal team," Mr. Preston began, his tone stripped of its usual presumptive authority, "regarding various approaches to the Winchester property situation." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "They've advised that all potential legal avenues have been exhausted." "I could have saved you the legal fees," I replied evenly. The purchase was entirely legitimate, as the court already confirmed. "Yes." The single word seemed to cost him something. However, Preston Holdings would like to propose a different arrangement. "We're prepared to make a substantial donation to your foundation, $2 million, in exchange for naming rights to the main building." The offer hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying both opportunity and threat. $2 million could fund programs for years, extend the foundation's reach exponentially, yet accepting would forever link the Winchester mansion with the Preston name, overshadowing Grandma Ruth's legacy with their purchased prominence. "No," I said simply. Jessica's sharp intake of breath broke the silence. "Emily, that's a fortune. You could help so many people with that money." I turned to my sister, seeing in her confused expression the same inability to comprehend principles that transcended monetary value. The foundation will help people regardless. What it won't do is compromise its core message by selling naming rights to the very power structure it's meant to challenge. Mr. Preston's face darkened, unused to outright rejection. You're being foolishly idealistic. This is business. No, I corrected him. This is purpose. There's a difference, though I don't expect you to understand it. Mark shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his father and me. Perhaps there's room for negotiation. There isn't, I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. The Ruth Clark Foundation stands for financial independence through education and self-determination. Accepting Preston money with Preston conditions would undermine everything it represents. Jessica stared at me as if witnessing a stranger wearing her sister's face. When did you become so uncompromising? I've always been this person, I replied. You just never bothered to notice. The truth of it settled over the room, like dust after demolition. For 28 years, I had shaped myself around others' expectations, made myself smaller to fit into spaces they designated for me. The quiet sister, the helpful daughter, the one who could be seated by the kitchen, doctor without complaint. All roles I'd accepted until the moment I chose not to. Then we have nothing further to discuss, Mr. Preston said, rising with wounded dignity. Mark, Jessica, we're leaving. But Jessica remained seated, her perfectly manicured hands twisted in her lap. Actually, I'd like to stay, to see what Emily has built here. The simple declaration carried surprising weight. Mark looked at his wife with barely concealed shock, while Mr. Preston's expression shifted from surprise to calculation, to something approaching resignation. Very well, he said stiffly. Mark, we should go. After their departure, Jessica and I stood alone in the parlor where afternoon light filtered through restored windows, illuminating dust motes that danced between us like tiny possibilities. Show me everything, she said quietly. Help me understand what you've created and why it matters more than $2 million. For the next hour, I guided my sister through the foundation's spaces, explaining our programs, introducing her to staff members, sharing the vision that had transformed a neglected mansion into a center for empowerment. She listened with unprecedented attention, asking thoughtful questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite obligation. In the library, she paused before a framed photograph of Grandma Ruth, taken during her years as one of the city's first female accountants. I never really knew her, Jessica admitted. Not the way you did. She saw people clearly, I replied. Their potential, not just their circumstances. She saw you, Jessica said softly, when the rest of us didn't. The acknowledgement, simple and unqualified, carried more meaning than any elaborate apology could have. It marked not reconciliation, but recognition. The beginning of seeing each other as complete individuals rather than comparative measurements. As we concluded the tour, Jessica turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Uncertainty, mixed with something like respect. I want to help, she said. Not with money or connections, but actually help. Maybe teach a class on professional image or networking skills, if you'll let me. The offer revealed how profoundly the day had shifted our dynamic. Jessica, who had always been the center around which others orbited, was asking for permission to participate in something I had created. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. The foundation can benefit from diverse perspectives. She smiled, the expression smaller but more genuine than her usual practiced brightness. I'll call you next week to discuss details. And Emily? She paused at the parlor doorway. I'm proud of what you've built here, truly. After she left, I returned to the front porch where the day's last visitors were departing. The Winchester mansion stood solid and renewed against the evening sky, no Longer a symbol of exclusion but a beacon of possibility. The table that had no place for me at Jessica's wedding had led to this: the creation of space where everyone could claim their seat through merit rather than birthright. The foundation would grow and evolve, facing challenges and celebrating victories. My relationship with my family would continue its tentative transformation, built on new understanding rather than old assumptions. And somewhere, I hoped, Grandma Ruth was smiling at the legacy her quiet granddaughter had crafted. From lessons learned in a small bedroom off the kitchen, that true worth isn't granted by others' recognition, but cultivated through patient determination and clear purpose. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.